It's finally time for the UFC debut of one of the biggest winners from Dana White's Contender Series last summer. Beast Mode, not Marshawn Lynch, it's Darrius Flowers set to take on Jake Matthews, the Celtic Kid, on 10 days' notice. Flowers coming into this one replacing Caramel Thunder Miguel Baeza. And if you look at it for a guy like Darrius Flowers, he came on to Contender Series last week. It was week 5. Headlined by Mick Parkin. Man, that guy's pretty darn good. You also had Jesus Aguilar on that episode. He's already got a lot of fights under his belt in the UFC. D. Gomes as well. A lot of big-time fighters. And so for Darrius Flowers, he was going to take on the Octagon Man, Amiran Gogoladze. That was an odd episode of our Contender Series breakdowns because I was stricken with the vid. And in that one, Darrius Flowers came into the chat. I somehow got unprofessional. I went with Amiran Gogoladze, and I reached out on Instagram to apologize to Darrius Flowers, who was all about it and a very nice gentleman. So it's great to see him finally make that debut because he tested positive for Ostern with the Nevada State Athletic Commission. It was those trace amounts, the pulsing, if you will. So he and at the same time Kyler Phillips popped for that. Now Flowers gets this shot, and it's really going to be interesting because Flowers, for what it's worth, from his amateur days where he was 11-5-1 to his pro career 12-5-1, he's bounced around weight classes like there's no tomorrow. He's fought as high as 200 pounds. He's fought as low as 170 pounds. He was supposed to make a debut at 155 pounds against Eric Gonzalez before that fight was scratched due to that struggle with the Athletic Commission. So for Flowers, it'll be interesting in this one, fighting at welterweight, getting that shot at 170, seeing how that weight cut affects him, because if you look at him, in the last year, what's he been up to? I think he's trained at every single gym known to man.
Round.
And I'll show, I started off, I was like, I'm going to set pins on a Google map, and then I'm just going to go from there. And then he on his Instagram page just posted every single gym, so I didn't have to look through individual photos and do it. But when you consider for a guy like Darrius Flowers, I mean, I think the most interesting part about him is, the best part of his game is his wrestling, and he really does butter his bread with that. The Gogoladze fight was weird because Gogoladze was going for an inverted triangle. Flowers has that kind of Jared Brooks, Shorty Torres, just get up. He then kind of has the slam drop down, and Gogoladze from bottom, he hurts his shoulder. That's the end of the fight. So an awesome win for Flowers, who really amped up Dana White before that one to get out and see that fight. For Flowers, though, 1-10 in a boxing record. He also had a win that was overturned to a no contest in New York against a 41-year-old where he dropped him twice, which is a fun fight to watch on the rewatch. But 7 knockout losses there. He's got plenty of knockout wins as a pro in MMA as well. He's got a lot of really good experience. He was 4-0 in 2020, and now he gets the opportunity against the guy who came in as 19-year-old on Tough Nations, and I'll throw the picture up there when he took on Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Jake Matthews, who can offensively wrestle sometimes, but defensively struggles with wrestling.
Jake Matthews is like a used car you're trying to get rid of, and you really hope that the people don't look and see that it's full of body filler. Because for Jake Matthews, I've described Jake Matthews to my friends before and why they should watch him fight. He's really, like, most of his fights are really entertaining, right? He's going to go in there and box with you. He does have heavy hands when he can land them. He can get taken down, but he's a good grappler, right? He can get submission wins. He has some submission losses. The problem is, he never shows up the version of him that I think we're going to get. And that's the really hard part for me trying to predict this fight, because Jake Matthews is 155 pounds. I thought was a really good fighter, actually, and I thought that was the weight class where he was really going to grow into and become one of those top-tier fighters. But he made the transition to 170, and I don't think it's a bad transition. Like, he's a big guy for the weight class now, but it took him a little while to become the physical guy that he is right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Matthews, physical maturity, and you get into it, he's only 28. He's 11-6 in the UFC. But if you look at it for Matthews, he looked big against Fialho and Semelsberger in his last couple
100%,
fights.
But that's my big thing with Jake Matthews. Like, it's just so complicated, and that's why I'm having a hard time articulating it, because Matthews is a very good offensive striker. When he's able to work the jab, when he's able to go to the body with his combinations, he can have a lot of success. But we have seen fights, even go back to the Rocco Martin fight, you probably didn't think that was the name you were going to hear today. Jake Matthews is having a lot of success, gets hit by one shot, gets in one grappling situation, and immediately submits. Like, for Matthews, he will look good, and then he can get caught in odd positions, which is weird, because for Matthews, those were the things he excelled in for so long.
The Li Jingliang fight, there's some grappling sequences in that fight. The Olivier Aubin-Mercier fight, the reason he lost is because he got out-wrestled for the large majority of it. The coaches were yelling at him to strike. I mean, Pat Cote and Kyle Noak, big-time coaches.
But that's always been my thing with Jake Matthews. He will strike and look really good, and they'll get hit by not a glancing blow. I don't want to undercharacterize what these shots are, but he'll get hit by shots sometimes that do wobble him, and then he fights like a different version of himself. And I don't know if Darrius Flowers is going to be the guy who goes in there and rocks him enough to force that version of him, but we have seen Jake Matthews get hit and then become a much different version of himself.
And in terms of all of those gyms that Flowers has been with, whether it was Syndicate, whether he's trained a little bit at, some of the gyms in the surrounding areas in Iowa, he's also gone down to other spots in Vegas, he's gone down to California, he's gone down to Miami as well. For Flowers, though, the big-time base Chicago fight team, and you've seen him be a main sparring partner with Bilal Muhammad there, and Muhammad has sung his praises for a really long time. That guy's a respected voice in MMA.
And what a great guy to train with.
Yeah, when it comes to Flowers, that's a great compliment to his game, because the boxing's a little bit secondary to the grappling, which could carry him to a win against a guy like Matthews in this one. For Matthews, the long history, the 17 fights in the UFC, he's got a 5-to-4 knockdown ratio, and I know knockdown ratios for me today are going to be a big part of it. I wrote them down for a lot of these fighters, but he's clipped. He's also been clipped. He's had good offensive wrestling.
I feel like
exchanges.
the Fialo fight was like 6 of his actual knockdowns.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy. And if you do look at it for Matthews, I mean, training out of Australia for this one, be interesting to see how both these guys make out at elevation as well.
The last thing I want to say, though, is Jake Matthews is a good example of you can't just look at a guy's age and kind of assume everything from that. You bring it up. He's been around in the UFC for 9 years now. It's like Jason Tatum. Bill Simmons wants Jason Tatum to still be 19 years old. The guy's 26. He's in his prime. So for Matthews, you might look at 28 and still think there's a lot of tread left on the tires, and there very well may be. But he has been in some difficult fights like you bring up, and he has eaten some damage at only 28. Robert Whittaker's the other example I was going to bring up. Whittaker's, 32 years old? Like, you don't look at 32 and think, wow, he's really old.
Yeah, Jose Aldo was almost out of it at 33.
But when you think about it, Aldo, Whittaker, these are guys who are fighting for titles in their early 20s, and they've just been able to maintain their spots in the division for so long. Matthews is kind of like that, but from like the 16 to 10 spot in the welterweight division.
Yeah, he's like Nathaniel Wood, and you even saw him get dropped on the weekend, even though he beat a big-time
What a
guy
fight that was.
in Andre Feely. But for Jake Matthews, I mean, fight of the nights with Li Jingliang, Johnny Case, and then a performance bonus over Andrea Fialho. We'll see how this one shakes out. Again, on really short notice. Is it for Darrius Flowers coming in on 10 days notice? We have a look at the Tapology vote, Matt. Surprised us that it is to you. It was a struggle. I think the fans, they like Jake Matthews. He's been around for a really long time. I'm going to say over under 80% Matthews.
I think it'll be over.
And it is over, so short sample size, 562 total votes, 90% Matthews, 10% going with Darrius Flowers. Again, Flowers has good boxing. Flowers has good wrestling. Flowers gets backed up sometimes, and I don't necessarily love that. Jake Matthews is kind of a low-volume striker. 3.09 to 2.44 is the significant strikes landed to what he absorbs per minute. Those are low in both categories, so this could be a large feeling out process, or Darrius Flowers goes out there, rinse and repeats takedowns, gets a ground and pound finish.
I think that's going to be a really difficult thing to do against a guy like Matthews, just because Matthews, he can get held down, but he will go for initial submissions, especially out the gate, and that does help him work his way back up to the feet. I'm going to have Matthews ever so slightly, because I do think the variety of shots he can throw on the feet is going to be effective, but Matthews is one of these guys who, when it's all offense, he is fine. But when he's the one being backed up, when he's the one who's forced to make those decisions at the ball, or on the balls of his feet, that's when he can fall into trouble. So if Flowers can really back him up and use his physicality, maybe he can have a lot of success, but I think Matthews still has a little bit left in the tank.
And we've seen the Ersegs of the world, the Basel Hafezs of the world, the Naimovs of the world come in, make giant impacts on short notice against ranked and unranked competition recently. I will go with Jake Matthews in the matchup, but there is no slight on Darrius Flowers. This guy can definitely get it done in a matchup like this. We will see how it turns out, both of us with the Celtic Kid in the fight. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Some big-time fights, including Roman Kopylov and one Claudio Ribeiro. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.